I get that it's cool and hip to rag on Fallout 76 right now, but when we take a step back and look at the entire Fallout franchise, this is nowhere near the worst that's ever happened. In fact, if anything, it's... Wait, you don't know? You don't know what I'm talking about?
You innocent little children! You sweet babes, you don't know! Well, boy, do I have something to tell you about. Say hello to Fallout Brotherhood of Steel.
Literally the worst thing to ever happen to anything named Fallout. Brotherhood of Steel was a console exclusive for the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox that is arguably the reason why Interplay sold off the Fallout franchise and likely what started their downward spiral to where they are now. This game was finished and released right around the time Interplay decided to lay off everyone at Black Isle Studios and subsequently close down the whole development house. Just like the original Fallout, this was both developed and published by Interplay, and yes, it was still that Interplay that made all of these great games, so I don't know what happened here. You could arguably even say that Interplay likely knew what kind of an abomination they were about to put out into the world, because the naming conventions between this game and the previous game are almost as if they intentionally wanted it to be extremely confusing looking back, as the previous game was called Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel, and this is just Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. And if anything, the plot lines are similar too. The exiled members of the Brotherhood of Steel go out to the Midwest and have to recruit a bunch of randos to save the day, and oh, by the way, for some reason the original Vault Dweller is here. That is the plot line for both of the games. One is a hokey but still passable real-time strategy game kinda set like Fallout, and the other is this pile of garbage. This game and its predecessor, Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel, have been stricken from the canon of all things Fallout, which, that doesn't really matter in the first place, but have never been referenced again anywhere else concerning Fallout games. It's the only Fallout game that has not been ported over on GOG, so you can re-enjoy it, and generally, no one from Interplay or Bethesda is quick to acknowledge this game. Let's talk about why. A good place to start for this is the gameplay. And, this is bad, like, by God, it is awful. It is nothing like any of the other Fallout games ever made, or even a strategy game. It's kind of a top-down shooter game, but it's not necessarily a twin-stick shooter game, because the left analog stick will move you around and aim where you're going to shoot, and the right one rotates the camera in a way that can and will get nauseating really fast. Not only is this top-down camera a little too claustrophobic for comfort in order to save on processing power, but also there's no isometric angle, so you won't be able to see things very well when you're turning around the camera. In fact, turning around the camera is pretty much useless thanks to this. Also, enemies can shoot you from off-screen, however, you need to be able to see the enemy to get a target fix on it, so you can't shoot them. On top of all of this, the hokey lock-on system Brotherhood of Steel uses requires that you be actively facing whatever enemy you want to shoot in order to lock onto it and shoot at them, which is very bad if you're running away from anything that's trying to get in melee range of you. That's not the only way that the enemy has an unfair advantage against you thanks to this game's lack of optimization. In order to try and save on processing power, grenades will not explode when they're off screen. I don't know what the logic is behind that, but if a bunch of grenades are being thrown, any of them that are not on the screen at the time will not explode. This is a big problem because certain bosses throw a lot of grenades and you will end up dying repeatedly to a bunch of grenades that suddenly decide to explode as soon as you walked on screen. There's also the ability to jump and crouch in this game, which at face value doesn't make sense because if you're at a perfectly top-down angle, it's kind of hard to see how high and how far you go. But of course there's going to be platforming puzzles. Platforming puzzles where not only do you have a hard time seeing how high and far you jump, but all the edges for the things you're jumping on are really iffy. And then later on, there will be laser puzzles that you will have to learn that, oh, by the way, there was a crouch feature the entire game. And also, by the way, more poorly done optimization, certain lasers won't properly load in, so you're going to be running around thinking that you solved a certain puzzle to disable a force field, and then you'll instantly die because even though the laser wasn't there, the death field still was. I died so many times thanks to this. This game kind of looks and feels like a really crappy Diablo clone, but the combat is just so awful in it. For starters, while melee is the best way to do damage in the game as it ignores a lot of defense stuff, it's also really hokey, because unlike literally anything else where you naturally move a bit forward when you're striking, you stay firmly planted in the ground whenever you attack with a melee weapon. And on top of that, you're going to likely miss as the enemies will move around a lot while you're striking. And bonus points after you're done swinging, missing, awkwardly shuffling forward a bit, and then swinging again. Your melee attacks have knockback, so you have to keep on doing the dance over and over again if you want to kill anything that takes more than 2 or 3 hits to kill. The enemies don't have to deal with this though, all their attacks are basically hit scan. There's not much for general modifiers when it comes to the combat itself, aside from stat boosts, getting bigger and better weapons, and occasionally some sort of prompt where you can control a turret. You can, however, use your skill points to get dog meat. Dog meat is totally useless in this game. In fact, I don't even think they call him dog meat in this game. Dog meat, or the dog that we're talking about here, will frequently, as soon as he spawns, run straight off of cliffs, straight into landmines, and sometimes he'll just idle inside of radioactive goo until he dies. Dog meat is maybe good for 1 or 2 hits, and then he's out of the game until you show up at the next save point and then just start the whole thing over again. Admittedly, I was able to exploit this a few times where I just kept on running back to the save point, respawning dog meat, and clearing a minefield that way, which I kind of feel terrible about, but at the same time I don't, because oh god, everything about this game makes me feel terrible actually. Now let's talk about all the odds and ends that sometimes can make a game, but in this case just break it even further. In some parts of this game, whether by design or just to try and save some processing power, it gets really dark. However, you're still going to have to do platforming, but now you literally cannot see where one platform ends and the other starts. There are also certain points in this game where stimpaks are pretty rare and enemies will spawn in behind you, so if you run out, you're just going to have to idle for a good 5 to 10 minutes per round of combat to let your HP regenerate. And by the way, don't forget to save. A lot. The final boss of this game is one that rivals the final boss from X-Files Resist or Serve. It is just so ridiculously bad. The first part of the fight is okay, the guy's bullet spongy, but it's reasonable, but then about midway through his HP bar, he decides he's gonna just restore all that health, and then he starts running around in circles like an excitable child that just had his first few sips of Red Bull. Half the battle is just making sure your bullets connect because you can't lock on to him when he's acting like this. When you finally get all that down, he decides that he's going to turn into the Master, or something he thinks is like the Master. And here we go. You're gonna have to fight this guy 4 times before you can get to the final stage of this fight. And once you get to this final stage, there's only one attack he does, and you can't melee him or he'll eat you and regain more HP than you can possibly do in damage. And you just have to sit there, shoot him 3 times, wait for him to inhale, and repeat. I looked at my footage. This will take a solid 10 minutes if you do it perfectly. Oh, by the way, the whole time, a really poorly looped instrumental of Slipknot's People Equal will be playing in the background. Like, it's really bad. For one, that is not a song that's very loopable because it's very easy to tell what part of the song you're in by the riff. And for another, there's like a 1.5 seconds of pause at the end of the song before it starts back up. What's even better is that after you kill this final form, you're going to have to kill it again 2 more times later in the level as things are winding down. But at least in this case, because the boss was modeled to be in the final boss arena and they didn't bother to fix anything with it, you can cheat. If you get past the tentacles that will almost instantly respawn, which I'm not sure they're supposed to do, you can walk up to the side of the boss and just melee it down into nothing where its attacks can't hit you, so you can effectively get rid of the boss that way. This is by far one of the worst boss battles ever, just because it keeps on repeating itself in the whole time that really crappy loop is playing. And while we're on the subject of the music, or at least talking about it as we recently were, let's talk about the terrible, no good, rotten, sloppy game design that is everywhere in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. The music, for example, just seems to be whatever the programmers were listening to at the time, and it really feels like they just licensed out whatever was on their mix CD. A lot of these tracks, while they do kind of fit with the whole gaming atmosphere at the time, just don't really fit Fallout's general aesthetic. And speaking of not fitting Fallout's general aesthetic, people are just too over-the-top hardcore in this game. It feels like this is a byproduct of Robert Liefeld's 1990s, but the issue was this was made in 2004. People got over this stuff a while ago. I originally thought the game's soundtrack was done in-house by some programmer who thought he was being all cool by drop tuning his guitar to C slack, but then as soon as Slipknot came on, I realized, oh wow, they licensed all of this. And as the credits rolled, aside from Slipknot and Killswitch Engage, this was a who's who of who couldn't get on second stage for Ozfest 2003. You know, let's just go on a side note here real quick. I know a lot of people give crap for punk rock being extremely simplistic and poor, and I have to admit, on occasion, I have told the joke at parties that the best way to kill a punk rock musician's career is to give him guitar lessons. But guys, as somebody that was way into the nu metal scene growing up and did play a lot of hard, like, amalgamous metal guitar, let's be honest here, that was all just, we tune our guitars way down to drop C slack because we can't even form chords with our hands. And you know what? Anything is going to sound super aggressive and crunchy when you excessively palm mute power chords and turn digital distortion up as high as it will go. That's like, I just described half of nu metal. Yeah, we got a bunch of really great acts, like we got System of a Down and stuff, but you know what? A lot of this music has not aged well. You know what else hasn't aged well at all? This game's overall aesthetic. It's just so off-putting that everything needs to be extreme with an X and a hyphen as if this was 1996 again, and it really just doesn't seem right or even familiar at all when Vault-Tec PSAs are dropping F-bombs like it's a cool thing to do. Between that and all the uncouth humor the ghouls use, really, this game puts you off whenever it can. Like, maybe 12-year-old me would have been really into this, but adult me is not. It really feels like this game wasn't made by Interplay, who originally made the Fallout series, but the Fallout name was instead licensed out to some shovelware company just trying to cash in on name recognition. It keeps on waving around major points of Fallout in your face like it's something to remind you that yes, this is a Fallout game. Yes, here is Vaultman, trademark. Here is Harold the Ghoul. Here are Deathclaws. But it just misses the mark so much. It's insane. Also, the game just looks really bad in general. Everything looks really muddy, and I don't know if that's because my TV is upscaling the PlayStation or something like that, but it really looks like not a lot was put into the textures of everything around you, except for certain women in the game. Let's face it here, Raider Matron has half of this map's polygons in her chest right now, and I know we're all excited that this is, I think, 6th gen console and now we can model some physics, but it really, I get a vibe that the programmers had no idea how body physics work. It's kind of weird. Like, looking at a lot of games from this time and then looking at how this was around the prime age of G4 Tech TV when it was part of basic cable and had a ton of new shows, and they were running specials like what video game has the most attractive women in that. Is anyone surprised that when the third wave of feminism started coming up, that video games were like one of the first things on the list that became like a major area of, I guess, work? Like, really, no one should be surprised by how things have gone down in the last decade. This was coming. The Raider Matron, Ruby the Wasteland Escort, and pretty much every other woman in this game is kind of a sign of where the priorities in design were going. When I finally beat the game and unlocked all the bonus features, more work was put into making pinup drawings of various characters in the game than there was work put into the concept art for this game. A lot of this concept art looks like it was the first sketch and someone said, okay, fine, put that in the game, draw more nudies. Really, it's some of these, I don't even think some of these girls are in the game. Like, I hate to be all, oh, this is problematic, but at least in this case, this is likely one of the factors as to why this game is so bad. The priorities were not straight. You know, talking about this is really depressing me. Let's do another cooking segment. How about some cheeseburgers? Okay, so first things first, make sure your meat is thawed. You're gonna need one of these meat capsules from Costco. You're gonna need some of these spices, the onion powder and a bit of garlic, and an egg. That's gonna be the base of your meats. Also, get whatever toppings you want on. I'd recommend tomatoes, onion, degeneracy sauce, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute, and a leafy thing. Yeah, don't forget your buns too. Also, secret sauce. All right, take your meat, get it out of its little meat capsule, put it in the bowl. Now, put a couple taps of the onion powder and the garlic in there. Not a lot. I use too much here because I'm stupid. And if you want, maybe some salt and pepper, but you really don't need it. Break an egg in with all the meat and then start kneading it with the seasonings. Don't use as much as I did. I did it wrong by tapping too hard on the base of the container. Get it to where it is just homogeneous, not anymore, because now we gotta add that sauce. Take the sriracha and then just squirt it over the top of the meat, just enough to where it covers all the stuff you see. And then start kneading that in. You'll know it's all good when your beef turns a sort of bright red. Now that you've got those, get a cutting board out, take the blob you have, that's gonna be just over a pound, make that into a half, mold that into a ball maybe, then take those two balls and mold them into halves. You've got perfectly good quarter-pound patties. No reason to touch that for a while. Take that cutting board, set it aside, get a different cutting board because you don't want diseases, and start chopping up the vegetables. Now, I prefer to take my tomatoes and dice them instead of slice them. I had that at a Costco cafeteria once, and it was actually pretty good and a pretty effective way of making sure the tomatoes don't slide out of the burger. Now, just cut up everything else you like. I've got like some avocado, some onion, leafy thing, and shred the leafy thing, slice the avocado, do whatever you want with the onion. That's all gonna come on later. Also, please, for the love of your fingertips, make sure you know how to properly hold and handle a knife before you do this. If you don't know, go get your parents, please. I don't care if you're like 30, just go get your parents. Once everything's all sliced and diced, now it's time to make that sauce. Normally, burger sauce is 1 part ketchup, 1 part mayonnaise, but I realized I didn't have any mayonnaise in my house, and I was too lazy to run out to the store and get it, and I'd already started cooking things, so I used the nearest white thing I had, which was ranch dressing. It turned out okay. I wouldn't recommend this. I think it's pretty much like, wow, this is the most awful thing ever, so just go with that. Set that all aside. Now it's time to cook the burgers. Get a medium-sized pan, get that on medium heat, and spray that down. Don't use any sort of liquid pan emulsion things, because I have had second-degree burns before from grease. It is awful. It is absolutely awful. So when you're flipping and slapping burgers around, things start splashing up, and it is painful, those burns. So just use a spray. Be a big boy, use spray. Now, take your burger balls and just smash them down. That's how we do it. Now, as for how long you cook them, I'd say do whatever you want. Don't let people judge you because you like a well-done burger. Maybe you're just not a big fan of tapeworms. If you like your cows still mooing when you bite into them, go for it. Don't burger shame. By the way, when deciding how many burger patties to put on the griddle at any one time, remember the more cold things you have on the griddle is more time it's needed to heat things up and heat up the pan between goes. Now, once you have everything cooked, give it a good flip, and then place the cheese on top, place a pan on top of that. You're good to go. In a separate pan, put the buns in for just a bit. I don't know what buns these are. I literally bought the cheapest thing ever I could find at the store. By the way, do not burn your fingers doing this. Use a spatula, unlike me, unless you also want to be like me and explain to human resources why for the last 2 weeks you've been signing punch correction forms instead of punching in on the clock. Once those are all done, take them off the heat, put them aside to let them rest for a moment, and then once they're rested, assemble. It goes bun, sauce, diced tomatoes, maybe onions, patties, stuff, lettuce goes in there somewhere, and bun on top. Congratulations, you just made burgers. What was this video supposed to be about again? So say whatever you want about Fallout 76, but at least with enough effort, it's serviceable, maybe even redeemable a few years from now, depending on how they reprice it and how they address the people that paid full price for this train wreck. This is something that with enough pressure on Todd, and Todd putting enough pressure on the developers, this can become a good game eventually. It's bad now, but it can be a good game eventually. Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, on the other hand, is utterly irredeemable. I am still personally of the mind that this was a game that sent Interplay on its downward spiral to where it eventually is now, where in 2016 they announced that they're going to be liquidating and selling off all their intellectual properties, which is kind of ironic actually, because they just got the free space rights back. That being set aside, the one good thing we can possibly divine out of Fallout Brotherhood of Steel is that because of its catastrophic failure, ZeniMax and Bethesda were able to swoop in and buy up the rights, because that's just what they do. And when they did, yes, they basically turned Fallout into Oblivion with guns and a turn-based targeting system, but that was a really good game. That was an amazing game. That is a game that people still play today. And then we got New Vegas, and then we got Fallout 4, and even Fallout Shelter is a good thing that came from this whole disaster. So yes, there is a big blunder, but there is a chance for that to be fixed, and ultimately, everything remaining as it is, I think we turned out pretty okay. Thank you all so much for watching. This about does it for today. Liking the video definitely helps. Subscribing will do something. And posting a description of the last fish you caught last time you went on a fishing trip will be interesting. I'm just going to let you guys know now that things are going to be pretty busy for me. As of next week, I am out of school, but I'm also changing addresses, and my wife scored an interview at the #1 grad school in the world for her discipline, so that is taking priority right now. I'm going to be making a lot of videos because I don't have to worry about studying and looking up case law and stuff, but again, I'm going to be very busy, but I hope I can get you guys a lot of good content. I know a lot of you have asked me to revisit the Charlatan score. I've got a whole bunch of other things, and I'm also going to start overhauling my Patreon soon so that you guys can get a roadmap of what's going on for this channel. I'm hoping to have this all out by the end of the year. So in the meantime, sign-offs are stupid and I don't know how to do them. Bye. Wait, you're not trying to back yourself in. Wait, I've done this maneuver before with the popcorn. You've been defeated. Walk away in shame.